Hey, this is Mr. Glunk, and this is Unit 1, Lesson 1, U.S. History. So go ahead, take your guided notes out, make sure you have your pen and your highlighter ready to go. We'll go ahead and get started. This is, again, America's beginning to 1877. This is the first unit. The first part of this unit is going to mainly cover this America's beginning, kind of looking at that early Revolutionary War. So the first thing we want to talk about is what it was like when we actually first came to the United States. So Native Americans combined hunting and fishing with farming. Okay, so they kind of moved away or towards this kind of more agrarian lifestyle, and they grew corn, beans, and cotton. So these are kind of some of those big cash crops that you saw in the United States. The Renaissance in Europe opened a world of knowledge and contributed to inventions like the compass and the astrolabe, both of which made the sea travel easier. This is kind of what allowed people like Christopher Columbus or other explorers to get to the United States. And then also religion began to change and Puritanism became more popular. Go ahead and highlight that Puritanism part. This might be something you see again on a test, but just understanding people escaping Europe from religious persecution, coming over to the United States. And so again, obviously a person who is the center of great controversy, a person who our city is actually named after, Christopher Columbus, ends up landing here in 1492. And then the European exploration exploded. And obviously we'll get into some of the more negative sides of what he did and what some of what he did led to. But just right now, just understand that he kind of led to this massive set of travel across the United States. And then the next thing you want to know on some of it is conquistadors as well. So conquistadors like Hernando Cortez conquered and explored lots of lands in the new land. So again, more people from Europe coming into this area. So when there's new travel, and again, this kind of pertains to what we're seeing now, people bring diseases. Just like how disease right now, like COVID, originated somewhere like China and it's brought over all around the world as we travel through plane or whatever else like that. The same thing happened back then. So Europeans brought deadly diseases such as smallpox with them. Natives, like a lot of Native Americans, ended up not having immunity to these diseases, so they ended up dying from it. So I want you guys to go ahead and highlight this right here, understanding that diseases came with settlers as they came across. So next I want you to look at here, England saw the colonies in the New World as a source of raw materials and markets for English goods. So again, highlight this. This is the basic part of imperialism. Most of you guys had Mr. Clark last year. I know imperialism is a big thing that you guys talked about, but it's all about getting those raw materials and then selling them to big markets for more money. And again, looking at this, Jamestown was the first English settlement that was founded by a joint stock company. And we're going to have to know the name joint stock company, but I've got a definition for it right here. So go ahead and highlight joint stock companies, because these were a group of investors who supported projects for profit. So we've got a couple right here looking at these, but it helped allow people to actually go over and travel and things like that. So again, Puritans who viewed the English church as corrupt set sail on the Mayflower for the New World. We talked about a lot of Puritans wanted to leave that English or European area to come to a new area where they can kind of start a foundation with their faith. And right here, again, these would be known as pilgrims. When they arrived, they signed the Mayflower Compact, which is just a plan to create some kind of a self-government. And again, we're seeing very basis for what we see in the United States today. We expand and expand and expand on this, but this is the very basis of what we see. So William Penn actually came over here too and established the colony of Pennsylvania for the Quakers. So I don't know how many guys like eating Quaker oats, things like that, but Quakers, the religion, kind of started by, or at least the colony with this, started by him. And again, they were just escaping religious persecution from England. And then many poor English colonists came as indentured servants. You're going to want to know this word. So again, take your highlighter out, highlight that. And they were promising to work for free for a specified amount of time. And then once that amount of time is done, they're granted their freedom. So it's kind of like a way to pay off that whole travel over here. And then in the 16 and 1700s, the Enlightenment spread throughout Europe, and the Americans kind of continued to use those Enlightenment ideas. So again, this is something I know you talked about, Mr. Clark, as well, but it'll be something we get into more detail for. But I want you to go ahead and highlight Enlightenment spread throughout Europe and the Americas, and we're gonna again go into much more detail on this later this week. But this is kind of the basis for where our country was founded, the independence movement started, was all from Enlightenment thinkers. And one specific one that you're gonna have to know, so highlight John Locke, is he said that the government existed because the people it governed allowed them to exist. So it's kind of like the idea of the democracy. We're allowing those that are governing us to govern us. And then the 1700s, the colonies experienced a great awakening and a renewal in the Christian faith. Go ahead and highlight this as well. Something you just want to understand with the Great Awakening is, again, you're seeing more people gravitating towards religion in the United States. So it's just something to kind of understand here. And so kind of moving more towards like what's causing the Revolutionary War, you're going to want to understand the cause and effect here. Okay, this is really important to understand. So in the 1750s, Britain and France fought each other in the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War. The British ended up winning, but it was a very costly win because it put them into huge debt. Now, the issue for this is they had to figure out a way to pay off these debts, and so they're looking for extra ways to gain revenue, and one of those extra ways they thought of was to tax the colonists. So Britain imposed the unpopular taxes like the Stamp and the Sugar Act. Go ahead, highlight those as well. Colonists said that the British had no right to tax them without representation. So again, highlight that one as well. You guys have all heard that rhyme, no taxation without representation. So if they didn't have representation to be able to vote on these taxes, they felt as though that they don't deserve to have these taxes just put on them. They're facing a debt because of something England and France did, not because of something they did. So the Townshend Acts attempted to reduce smuggling and things like that because it kind of wanted to focus everything on the main trade from Britain. But in 1770, colonial anger resulted in the Boston Massacre. So in the Boston Massacre, what you guys want to understand is kind of started from a little bit of an angry mob type of feel where colonists were almost like protesting what was going on to British soldiers. A rock was thrown over into those soldiers, and then the soldiers opened fire on them. I believe it was 5 people, might have been more by 1 or 2 or less, but it's a low number of people that ended up dying, but they call it a massacre because that name became a rallying cry. Like the Boston Massacre helped show people that, you know, the British are doing some wrong things here and we need to step up and go ahead and do something, protest against them, start this Revolutionary War, but they're shooting on their own people. That's what we want to understand. So the next thing is the Committee of Correspondence was then created to keep the other colonies aware of the British activities. Again, they don't like what the British are doing, so now they're trying to make sure everyone knows what they're doing. So in 1773, colonists dumped tea into the Boston Harbor and the Boston Tea Party. So this is again a protest against what the British are doing by destroying some of the things that they're importing into them. So delegates from the colonies met at the First Continental Congress and approved boycotts of British goods. So again, we're slowly rolling that ball towards moving towards that Revolutionary War. The British tried to seize the colonist militias, weapons, and concords fighting between the Minutemen and the British troops erupted at Concord, the first fight of the American Revolution. So, kind of a fun fact for you, the reason why they're called Minutemen is because they have to be ready to fight at a minute's notice. But this is some of the early fighting that you see with the war. And then you see the Second Continental Congress made George Washington, as you see right here, the commander of the Continental Army. So he's the one kind of leading us through this fight. Next thing, go ahead and take your highlighters back out. You want to highlight Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Again, the big thing to know with writing this Declaration of Independence and everyone who signed it is you're essentially signing your name to treason. Treason was punishable by death. So all of these were almost, if we lost this war, they're signing their death sentence. So it's a very important thing to understand. They're taking a major risk to do this. And then again, highlighter out, this is something you guys have heard since second grade, but then we have those 13 original colonies now became the United States. And again, the British outnumbered the troops. We used something called guerrilla warfare. We actually knew the layout of the land better and were able to kind of surprise attack them and then run away to fight. But we ended up winning. The last battle was fought at Yorktown, Virginia. And Cornwallis was trapped by the French Navy. He's the leader of the British Army and Washington's army, and then he eventually ends up surrendering in October in 1781. And this leads to, again, highlighters out, the Treaty of Paris, which was signed in 1783, officially ending the war. So that's where we're going to stop for the first one. And the next one we're going to talk about is going to get into the beginning and findings of how we're actually going to set up our government in the United States. So tune in for the next one.